Hello, everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. I think in our society today, woke ideology is permeated through so many people have this, they can't see the forest because of the trees. They're missing the big picture. An example is Gwinnett County Public Schools. They impose a restorative justice system. I've talked about this before. It's a bat crazy policy. It'll never work. It will never get the results that everybody claims that it will get. So the behavior in the schools is total chaos. There's a lot of violence, fighting, guns, so forth and so on. This is Karen Watkins. This is a board member. This is at a work session, November 17, 2022. And the person answering the question is Jorge Gomez. He's special assistant to the superintendent. He might go by George. I think somebody referred to him as George. Apologize if I got that wrong. But she seems pretty, frankly, oblivious, claims nothing's changed. And Mr. Gomez says, yeah, something really big has changed. So this is a rather lengthy clip, but I think it's important to go through the whole thing. And in the background, you'll notice the word equity in the top of the right-hand corner of the screen behind Ms. Watkins as she's speaking.
Are also involved in that process. I would say to you,
I had something behind yours, but that's okay. Well,
Mr. Thigpen.
Okay, so I did have something behind Dr. Tree because I think I have a higher level question. The policy. I am all for the policy, but as Mr. Gomez has told us in multiple meetings, we were not able to implement. And I'm sorry, we would not be able to implement in a timely manner. I mean, he was giving us the call to help, and I saw it in the meetings as I reviewed. My question is, we did not make a lot of changes to the handbook. This is where I'm confused. We didn't make changes to the handbook. We added some, we copied and pasted some handbook stuff into the policy, JCDI, to show them, to show how we are breaking out the levels. My question is, and this is probably for Dr. Watts or Mr. Thigpen, because you're in charge of this. So help us understand, how did we get to the point of we are not tracking absenteeism, or we are doing excellent, because the consequences of violations, the explanation or type of violation is still there. It's still the same. It's still the same. But, and especially for anything that has a law behind it, which would be from the fights to the carrying of guns, the drugs, and everything, nothing has changed. Nothing. So how did we get to the point of we are no longer all having any consequences, all because we passed a policy which had very few changes except more explanation for certain levels, more of the lower levels actually, but all the higher levels of violations, nothing has changed. So, and people are saying, including teachers, students, they're stating that we no longer have consequences. We're not, for tardies, AWOLs, we're not doing anything about it. So how did we get to that point? How did we get to that point? Because I can't understand how we couldn't explain this, that nothing has really changed over these past months.
Mr. Thigpen, can I weigh in there just a second? So of course I'm not going to have the answer, the full answer, but just taking a step back. Remember that with policy JCDI, the first bucket of policy JCDI, that's where you as a board expressed your value statements. You've got to read those value statements to try to answer some of these questions. Your value statements were, I don't have them all in front of me, so forgive me, along the line that suspension would be used as a last resort. Your value statements were that we are now aware that discipline is developmental in nature, etc. Right? So I've given this example before to individuals. If I, as a father, am used to using one technique of discipline at home, and my wife says, hey, we need to change our way of disciplining, then As an implementation, I stopped doing those things I was doing before. So the kid may say, oh my God, daddy's not doing the same thing he did to me before. Maybe I can get away with this behavior more often. But if your value statement, and I appreciate the fact that you're now saying that maybe we need to take a relook at that. But if your value statements, and those are the first 8 or 9 things of that policy, say things like, we know discipline is developmental. We know we need to use suspension as a last resort. We are sending the message that we as a collective body want to look at discipline in a different way. That policy, nowhere in that policy does it say stop suspending kids. What it says, though, is we encourage you to look at it a different way.
You'll notice the other board member, besides Mrs. Watkins, sort of shaking his head. I don't understand. I don't understand what changed. I'll tell you what changed. You had a very low standard for behavior before you implemented the policy. So instead of raising the standard, you lowered it. It's not complicated. Newsflash. Teenagers misbehave. Teenagers, when they misbehave, punishment is often a very good thing for them. And teachers who have children in the school system would never apply the standards that the school system is applying. They're going to apply a much higher standard for behavior. So Ms. Watkins just really doesn't get this. She's all in on the policy, though, so nothing much is going to change on her end. They actually believe that throwing a few dollars at teachers to improve their counseling skills, that's for, if anyone, doesn't matter the age, if they're really having emotional problems and controlling themselves, then many times a mental health care professional treatment is warranted. And the government, if they want to provide that, fine. But that's predominantly the role of the parent to do that. So there's laws, child neglect. Parents are responsible and guardians for their children and minors. They're going to school. There's only so much the school can do. So you're destroying the environment for the vast majority of students who behave. All done in the name of equity. It is, you can call it a fungus or religion. It's an ideology that is so permeated our society that we make really dumb decisions, primarily based on feelings and emotion and that sort of thing. To show you how bad this has gotten, this is Eric Thigpen. He's the Executive Director of Academic Support. In the same meeting, he's talking about the statistics on fighting.
Now, you may see some differences here that may ask questions or bring questions to mind. If we have more incidents than students, then that means students violated the rules more than once. If we have more students than incidents, then that means that more than one student was involved in an incident. And if we have more rule violations than incidents or students, that means that multiple rules were violated per incident or student. So again, these are just major rule violations, and you see that for Rule 5 here. And I want to call to our attention 5BB. And so you'll see for the 21-22 school year, we had 473 incidents of fights that involved 724 students for a total of 750 rule violations. In comparison to this year, you do see an increase to 638 incidents of fighting involving 947 students.
So those are the fights that were recorded. And you can see with the chaos that the parents, students, and teachers talk about, that there's probably a hell of a lot more fights than Mr. Thigpen has recorded there. There's also, in the light of the evidence that we're seeing, that, as I've said, the standards for behavior were not good before this policy or guidelines came along. So this is a screenshot of the number of times guns, knives were brought to school. And later this same day at the business meeting of the school board, many parents spoke on this topic. But here you see razors and blades from last year to this year, 7 to 14. This is in 3 months. This is just during a 3-month period. Pellet or BB guns, 10 to 16, and handguns, 2 to 6. So this sounds like total chaos. Metal detectors aren't, students don't feel, it doesn't welcome them, according to the school board. So they don't use them. Apparently, I don't know if they use them in any schools or not, but it's something that, in this case, seems like it would be warranted. But the school board's not talking about that. This is Chairman Therese Johnson, the same work session, November 17th meeting. Therese Johnson's a Marxist. I've talked about this before. I think she would own it. Maybe she wouldn't. It's not a pejorative. It is what it is. She believes strongly in the woke ideology. And notice she does not use the word discrimination. She uses the term disproportionality.
And the system was responding to us, right? They shared information with us about disproportionality and discipline. We reviewed our policy. We advocated for a policy that can ensure that we are eliminating the disproportionality and discipline. We saw that mostly Black and brown students in our school system were negatively impacted by our discipline policies. So we worked together and we revised this policy. Now, I fully support the policy. And what I have said before is that I think it's really imperative that we have experts around this process in the way that it's implemented, where people truly understand how we need to execute the discipline policy.
Would you trust her on a jury if you were on trial? This would depend on what the color of your skin is. Maybe other factors. I don't know. This is the problem. This has real life consequences when you keep pushing the woke agenda. K through 12, year after year, day after day. Social emotional learning will tell you what to think and will tell you how to feel about what we just told you you should think. And if you do that day after day for years and you're concerned with disproportionality, then you're not going to treat others as you would wish to be treated. You're going to treat others as you would wish to be treated, unless they fall into a certain group. So Therese Johnson, she does not use the word discriminatory. She uses disproportionality. So the thing is, when you talk about proportionality, she's talking about discipline. Well, is it possible that you're doing a disservice? Have you thought about the fact that disproportionality occurs in real life everywhere? If you look at the NBA, it's disproportionate. If you look at high-level university mathematics courses, disproportionate in terms of, I'm assuming, far more Asians per percentage are in those categories than other groups. I don't think Therese Johnson's too much concerned. She doesn't talk about disproportionality in reading comprehension. She talks about disproportionality in all these other areas. So she's done a severe disservice by pushing this agenda, but every one of them have gone along with this, the woke agenda. Restorative justice practices is really, really dumb. You have to trust the teachers and the principals at the school that your child's in. You're going to have to trust them. You have no choice. So pushing the social emotional learning, if you believe in that disproportionality, everything has to be in proportion. If you believe this, there is no end game. You can never get there. And you, as I said, you cannot view things logically. In the same way, Therese Johnson, I wouldn't trust her on a jury. I'm sorry, many of the people that were graduating in 10 years, I don't understand with this methodology that we have in our education system, how they're going to be able to serve as a judge or a juror on a trial, for example, again, without factoring in, you have to factor in what is proportionate. So this is why it's so obvious to me, so transparent, that this is a dumb restorative practice, justice practice, dumb idea. In Therese Johnson's world that we would have to live in, you can never get. There is no end game. So you can never get there because nothing will ever become proportionate. And I don't know why you would want it to be proportionate. Why is that so important? The important thing is that there aren't people widely discriminated against. But on top of that, if you accuse someone of discrimination, as Therese Johnson, she's not accusing anyone of discrimination. Says the burden of proof should be on the plaintiff, which she's not the plaintiff because she's not saying it's discriminatory. She's saying it permeates society. We can only fix our problems with proportionality. The interesting thing is this policy change actually proves the point that the students prior to the policy change a few months ago, you saw the numbers from Mr. Thigpen, there was no discriminatory practice. In fact, later on in that same meeting, they have quotas and hiring practices. Their teaching staff and their administration is, according to Ms. Johnson, she's pushing for proportionality in that. So you have much higher levels, which says the students were never discriminated against in the beginning, unless you want to discriminate them by not holding them to a higher standard of behavior. You could say that. But you can't say they were discriminated against for not committing bad behaviors because the bad behaviors went up. So the discrimination, to me, in my mind, in which, as I said, Therese Johnson has talked about this, is actually against the black and brown students that she claims she's trying to help. Or at least I think she said she's trying to help. Because she uses the term justice constantly in that regard. There was a business meeting after this meeting on November 17th. I'm going to talk about that in a future episode because you can see that the board really isn't going to do much and the parents are up in arms and they make several valid points I'd like to talk about. Bottom line, I've said this before, if you have children in the school system, if you have any means or any way to get them out of it, improve their situation, protect them. On top of that, you really need to push the Georgia State Legislature to start allowing parents to send their children to other schools and get them out of the school system. And you also need to get rid of the school board and the superintendent. They're all guilty of malfeasance here, in my opinion, because the standards were low and now they went lower. They're looking at it as, oh, everything was hunky-dory, we expected improvement and we didn't get it. That's not what's happening here. So that's my episode today. I hope you got something out of it. And please, if you disagree with me, love to hear your comments. If you're interested, if you're a teacher, parent, student, administrator, former, current Gwinnett County Public School System, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're willing, I'd like to interview you for this podcast. Really appreciate you watching. Thank you.